Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War news update, the second part thereof from my normal pieces for the 15th of May 2025, but I've done my breaking news updates concerning the peace negotiations and the meeting of the delegations in Turkey. Just before I do my normal military aid stuff, let's just give you a very quick update on the very latest. Zelensky has confirmed that Ukrainian Minister of Defense Umerov will lead the delegation to Istanbul. The primary goal is to push for a ceasefire. Zelensky emphasized that Russia isn't serious about negotiations, but is sending a delegation out of respect for Trump. But here's the kicker. Here's the important stuff. He said, if there's no ceasefire or meaningful outcomes, we will demand a powerful sanctions package against Russia, including from the US. The Ukrainian delegation will remain in Turkey until May the 16th. Zelensky and Erdogan will head then to Albania afterwards. So it is all about getting a ceasefire or meaningful outcomes, and that's quite a vague term. But this is the fascinating bit. Trump's position is to put pressure on both sides, and we are being pressured more than Russia. That's what Zelensky said. That is the reality. That's all you need to know, that Zelensky and the Ukrainians are being pressured more than Russia. In fact, this was a quote from Trump today, and it is disgusting. So asked why the Russian delegation is such a kind of third tier set of people compared to Zelensky and the top tier Ukrainian delegation, and said, was he disappointed in that? He said no. He asked whether he added that he was not disappointed that the Russian delegation sent to Turkey Thursday for high-level talks with Ukraine did not include Putin. Quote, I'm not disappointed. Why would I be? We just took in $4 trillion and you're disappointed about a delegation? So he's asked about something to do with Ukraine and Russia. Are you disappointed that there's a low-level delegation over there? He said, why would I be disappointed? I've just earned the US $4 trillion, which, by the way, is incorrect. He's talking about a trade deal going on with, somewhere in the Middle East, compared to, or instead of, concerning himself with the Russia-Ukraine war and the peace talks going on there. Honestly, it's insane. Like, that anyone still gives this guy the time of day in terms of believing that he's actually going to have some beneficial impact on Ukraine, that he's got Ukraine's best interests at heart. It's absolutely not true. In fact, this is a reaction that someone's posted in response to, I don't know anything about the Russian delegation in Turkey. I'm not disappointed with it. Of course, you are not. And in fact, Ilya Ponomarenko responds to this very, very explicitly. I'm not disappointed. Why would I be? We just took in $4 trillion and you're disappointed with the delegation? I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. That was his full quote. Ponomarenko says, guys, I know it. You know it. This administration is simply dysfunctional. This is impossible to work with or partner with in serious matters of war and peace. No matter what we do, no matter what kind of shit Putin does, all these mumbo-jumbo dances end up the same way. Trump keeps sucking up to Putin and spitting at Ukraine. The best the free world can do is to try to mitigate the catastrophic harm from this madness. So, and someone says, I mean, it is possible to work with them. It's written in the box. Give $4 trillion. So all you need to do to get the US on side is just pay them loads of money. I was listening to actually a Republican politician say, do you know what? This kind of transactional approach to foreign policy, this purely transactional approach, I've got a real problem with. Yes, you need political realism, but not just political realism. You need a mix of political realism and idealism. The ideals are standing up for freedom, democracy, free trade, etc., etc. We need that together with realism. At the moment, all we're getting from the US is just realism, is just transactionalism, is just how do we line our own pockets. And unfortunately, that means the regard for Ukraine, the desire for a just peace, the desire for an outcome that is beneficial for the victims of this invasion are way down the list of considerations. So Zelensky says Trump's position is to put pressure on both sides, and we are being pressured more than Russia. Right, on to military aid. Sorry, I had to get that out of my system. Right, the EU will spend 900 million euros in the coming weeks from frozen Russian assets, frozen Russian asset profits on weapons and ammo for Ukraine, and another 1 billion euros to boost drone and missile production in Ukraine, the European Commission announced. So I've probably reported on that first bit before, but it looks like they've added some as well. So that's really good news from the EU there. So there's to send an extra billion from the frozen Russian assets profits to Ukraine's defence, but the new tranche brings that total of recent EU defence support for Ukraine to 3.3 billion euros, $3.6 billion. And I don't know if that includes that added on bit as well. Okay, some Rearm Europe funds. So this is where Europe is, or Ursula von der Leyen has been spearheading this project to get $150 billion into EU nations to rearm, and then the possibility to borrow further funds at preferential rates and do some jiggery-pokery with the balance sheet to maybe move that up to 800 billion euros in the long run. But that 150 billion euros here, some of those funds will be funneled to Ukraine's defence, according to an EU official. So Andrius Kubilius, a defence commissioner, says only member states can take out loans within the 150 billion euros instrument, but they can use these funds for joint procurement with Ukraine. So there's nothing to stop them doing that. Taiwan will contribute $2 million to the International Mine Action Fund for Ukraine, led by Lithuania. They previously participated in the restoration of Ukrainian schools and kindergartens damaged by Russian strikes together with Lithuania. So Taiwan doing something to help there. And then we hear from the Times newspaper that Britain is sending Ukraine IKEA-style flat-pack decoys to mislead Russians. From fake tanks to heat-emitting missiles, UK produced dummy weapons to aiming to draw Russian fire away from real weaponry near frontline zones. Let's pop it into this this article. UK sends flat-pack decoys to Ukraine in a bid to confuse Russian forces. Okay. We haven't gifted a huge amount of these, so anything we can do to make the quantities look greater on the front line is advantageous to us, explained Nauri Simner, the RAF squadron leader, as her team unveiled Raven, a novel air defence system created by the Ministry of Defence. So that was the AMRAAM firing on the Supercat chassis air defence system. Okay, so we heard about that. But UK troops are attempting to deceive Putin's forces into thinking Britain has sent more weapons to Ukraine than it has. So Russia uses up its weapons, destroying cheap printed cutouts of weapons rather than the real kit. Simner said the adversaries equipped with satellite imagery and drones were now better able to spot the difference between inflatable tanks of the sort used in the Second World War and real ones. As a result, Task Force Kindred, an MOD team tasked with responding to Ukrainian requests for novel kit, has worked with industry specialists to come up with new methods of deception. Experts take digital photos of equipment the UK is sending to Ukraine and print them on material that is then shipped out to Kiev for Ukrainian forces to assemble in a matter of hours. The decoys are then deployed to the front line to confuse enemy systems. Colonel Ollie Todd, a Royal Marine who is the military lead for procurement for Task Force Kindred, said that the 20-strong team had worked on other decoys, including those for Challenger 2 tanks and AS-90 armoured self-propelled artillery, both of which are in short supply. Quote, they just look like the real thing. This could be, you could be quite easily fooled, he said, adding the MOD has come a long way from the days of billowing inflatable tanks. He said that if the UK was providing 5 vehicles to Ukraine, the MOD would probably send as many as 30 decoys along with them, which would typically look real from a short distance of 25 meters away. Decoys are, quote, fundamental on the battlefield, he added. The MOD has previously gifted Ukraine Stormer vehicles fitted with Starstreak anti-air missile launchers. Todd said the Stormer vehicles are being targeted by Russia because they were considered to be a significant threat. Within a week, we were able to get the system scanned, get the decoys printed, and send the decoys forward, he said. Katerina Chernohorenko, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, said on the fringes of the London Defence Conference that the Russians were also deploying decoys on the battlefield. Quote, decoys are a very needed element of warfare today, she said. Russia was sending hundreds of drones to attack Ukrainian forces, but many of them were essentially fake because they contain tiny amounts of explosives. However, the Ukrainians will waste some of their capabilities shooting them down. And so on and so forth. But really interesting that here are some stats maybe. There have been about 400 firing. I don't know if this is. Oh no, that's going back to the Raven, where we hear that there's 70% success rate from 400 firings of them. So that's good news. But it really interesting to see the UK, trying to be innovative, and that they've actually got an innovation task force. Task Force Kindred, which is fantastic to kind of think around these problems and be as creative as possible in terms of helping out Ukraine where they can. Now, we hear that the UK and Germany, and this isn't necessarily anything to do with Ukraine, particularly, at least at the moment, they might end up getting these kind of missiles to Ukraine eventually, but that would probably be very long time away. The UK and Germany are teaming up to develop a long-range strike weapon with a range of over 2,000 kilometers. Also on the table, joint torpedo procurement and German purchase of British military bridges. So a closer relationship between the British and Germans there. And I also think, the days of Taurus are probably numbered in terms of going forward into the future. There needs to be a replacement for that, which is, if I'm correct, it is on the cards and whatnot. It's being developed. But yeah, I think this war has shown us that it's much more advantageous for sides to be able to throw munitions from a distance rather than rely on fighting up front. And it looks like European long-distance missile capabilities are somewhat wanting. Indeed, I think the German Navy has just said that they are looking at kitting out some of their frigates with the Tomahawk missile. So, it's this over-reliance on American weaponry is leading, here the Germans and the British to get together and say, look, we need to, the Ukraine war has taught us that these missiles are still useful. The new British drone built for hunting Russian submarines. Okay, so this, again, not necessarily to do with the war in Ukraine. However, it could be super useful in the Black Sea. So this is the SG-1 Fathom. Each drone can operate for 3 months underwater without surfacing. They're so cheap, hundreds can be deployed at once. They only surface when something suspicious is detected. The AI distinguishes different ship classes and vessels, detect any Russian submarine approaching British waters, protect vital undersea cables carrying global communications, monitor the strategically crucial passage between Iceland and UK water. So these are going to be used for defending our shores without having to get actual submarines full of sailors, submariners in them. You can just have a fleet of these out and about doing their thing, but imagine how these could be used in the Black Sea. That would be fantastic. I don't know how far off we are in terms of the development of this underwater torpedo. I talked about that. You've heard me since the beginning of the war saying drones, torpedo drones that can just sit and wait for ages and then activate outside, say, a Novorossiysk. You send them there so they don't have to go through the booms. They can't get into the port itself. You just wait for the ships to come out and then bang, you hit them. Well, that's exactly what I've been talking about for several years. And this is it. Now, if you're talking about the UK designing these to be used in British waters, I'm betting that they will also have half an eye on providing these for Ukraine, because at the end of the day, you're going to get feedback on how useful and how successful these are when you put them into a real battlefield test arena. This is Jeff 20 on 46, who keeps an eye on different pieces of kit out in Ukraine. The Ukrainian National Guard has received a modernised variant of the BM-21 Grad 122mm MLRS that mounts the rocket launching module on a MAN TGM 6x6 truck chassis. Alexander Pivnenko, commander of the National Guard, announced this on his Facebook page, stating that they are modernising their fleet of BM-21s. So that's good news, upgrading old bits of kit to be much more useful, much more modern. An ex-Belgian crane equipped with a Volvo N10 cargo truck in service with the tactical support group fought during the construction of fortifications. And this is the difference between someone like Jeff 2146 and me, who knows jack all about military vehicles, as I look at a picture like this, go, and I think I showed you this picture the other day, saying, look, they're using barbed wire and together with, in concert with these dragon's teeth to make sure the Pokrovsk area fortifications are as good as they can be. And Jeff 2146 looks at that truck and goes, that's a Belgian truck with a Belgian crane and blah, 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 and knows exactly where that's come from. And then he adds it to his list of, oh, look, Belgium have actually donated some more stuff to Ukraine than was otherwise known. Right, if you remember, there has been this damage done to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That was a single drone that was supposedly going to, or is supposedly going to cost $10 million to fix. That is causing, I mean, this is a protective shield to the nuclear power plant. It's good news that France has contributed 10 million euros to the Chernobyl fund account. These funds will allow further financing work on repairing the protective shelter over the fourth power unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was damaged by a Russian drone attack. Now, speaking of France, French President Macron has confirmed that all Caesar-wheeled self-propelled howitzers produced in 2025 will be sent to Ukraine. He also emphasized that the best security guarantee for Ukraine is a strong Ukrainian army, which is good news. So all of those are going to go to Ukraine, every single one they're producing in 2025. French Aid to Ukraine reports that Army General Jérôme Bélanger, Chief of the Air Force Staff, and his British counterpart have brought together their European and international counterparts from Australia, Canada, Japan, and New Zealand. The aim of the meeting was to discuss the security guarantees that could be given to Ukraine. So here we've got maybe a coalition of the willing kind of air forces looking to, I don't know, could it be work on what a no-fly zone might look like, about how they can support Ukraine in the air given a potential ceasefire. Really good to see that UK and France at the head of that coalition there. Now, Erland from Norway, I've interviewed him a few times, says Norway's Chief of Staff, General Erik Kristoffersen, visited Ukraine for high-level talks. Just recently met General Sirski, who praised Norway as, quote, one of the most effective partners in resisting Russia's invasion. Of course, Norway is very lucky. It's a rich country with lots of hydrocarbons just off the shore, and as a result, they've been able to create their sovereign wealth fund that they've been, I think, dipping into, given that the war in Ukraine has caused oil prices and gas prices to really rocket up particular times, particularly at the beginning of the war, and that netted them a whole bunch of cash, which they are now, thankfully, at least somewhat putting towards Ukraine. So Kristoffersen received the Armed Forces' highest honour, the Cross of Merit. In 2025, Norway joined a drone coalition with at least $55 million plus for drones. It's also partnering with the UK and on FPV drones and battlefield tech. And I think Norway is also leading the maritime coalition with the UK, if I'm not mistaken. The Czech company LPP Holding has transferred several dozen of its new MTS series strike drones with AI to Ukraine. So we've seen this from Germany with the HQ2. Now we've got AI drones coming from Czechia. MTS SO5, S25 and S40. The SO5 has a radius of several tens of kilometers. 25 radius of hundreds of kilometers, and the 40 has internal combustion engine and is capable of carrying warheads of up to 12 kilograms. So together with AI, hopefully that will be useful. Ukroboronprom, that's the Ukrainian state defense concern, and the Spanish company Escribano Mecanical signed a memorandum on the establishment of licensed production of combat modules in Ukraine. This is something that's being seen more and more, which is the Ukrainians are able to work in concert with these other international arms concerns to produce things in Ukraine, or even there's one Spanish company that's going to be producing Ukrainian stuff in Spain. So kind of it can work both ways, but this is about, I guess, ramping up production inside Ukraine of equipment that can be used, and it sort of shortens the maintenance schedule, I guess, and has a much smaller maintenance footprint if you're making stuff in Ukraine. There's a really good United 24 video. In fact, I've seen a few of theirs recently that have been fascinating in looking at. So I was looking at the Spartan, which the UK produced, very fast infantry fighting vehicle, and they've got a bunch of those, and United 24 did a piece on that. They did a piece that I watched this morning, a video on the M113, the old, from the 60s Vietnam War era APC. That's, I think the US have provided some 600 to Ukraine. I know lots of countries have provided these. These are really old school but very well used pieces of kit, and they were showing how they have adapted them in the same way they've adapted like the Spartan and all these different vehicles that they get given from other countries. With some of them, they end up adapting them to make them more suitable for whatever needs they have. And they were showing the M113, which would normally have this kind of, I think, a Browning machine gun on top, which a gunner would have to operate. And they replaced that with a turret that looks pretty much like you see there. And I wonder if it's the same. It looks like this one, actually. And they say that can then be operated from inside the M113, so no one has to be out and is vulnerable to getting hit. So you have this not automatic turret, but it's a remote turret that you can work from inside. And so, and that's not the first vehicle I've seen them talk about that. In fact, I think with the the Spartan, they did that as well. So it's replacing just manned guns with remote guns. Right, Romania has abandoned plans, though, to work with Ukraine to manufacture the Neptune missile, says Tim White. This is a translation of a Ukrainian article, but the story originated in Romania. The defense analysts are shocked. NATO has a big shortage of similar long-range missiles. So going back to UK and Germany wanting to develop a 2,000-kilometer missile, yeah, that's because there is that capability shortage. Taurus, Storm Shadow, and Scalp EGs, all the same family missiles, but they're not really being produced in the quantities. In fact, the production of Storm Shadow, for example, has effectively stopped. There's like midlife upgrades, but really they're not being built anymore. So we need something to replace that. And you'd think that Neptune could be an option, right, or a stopgap, but sadly, it looks like Romania have stopped. Romanians have changed their mind about making missiles together with Ukraine. They can't explain it in any way, but there could have been a Neptune there, is what that article says. We just don't know what the reason is, but potentially a shame there. Now, the GUR has unveiled a fleet of Magura naval drones, so quite a few people sharing some of the footage and the stills from this video. Here we have new iterations of the Magura. So we've seen the V5. Magura is one that we've talked about an awful lot. Is it the V7 recently? Was a longer version with better armaments. This looks like the one with sidewinders. Now we know that they took out recently some Russian jets with these drones. So pretty useful stuff. So there you go. There is some imagery from that expo. And here we have some stills. Ukraine unveils a V7 naval drone. So this is a V7 used to shoot down 2 Russian Su-30 jets. The upgraded 7.2 meter, 3,400 kilogram version has a greater payload, improved endurance, and missile and turret weapon configurations. So there you can see on the left the much bigger, I presume, Magura V7 compared to what I presume on the right is the Magura V5 that we've seen so often. That's the one that, very early in the war we saw, or earlier in the war we saw washed up, one of those washed up on the shores. And behind you can see how much bigger the new upgrade is. So yeah, there you go. We have Fabian Hoffman here, bit of a missiles expert, saying, thanks to Scholz, Taurus has become a symbol of Germany's vulnerability to nuclear coercion. If Merz fails to deliver the weapons system after the ultimatum expires, he too forfeits his credibility. I'd be cautiously optimistic that his advisors and he himself are aware of that. That said, it's important to remember that Scholz's delaying tactics mean that Taurus still needs to be integrated and Ukrainian personnel trained. 3 months is an optimistic estimate. 4 to 6 is more realistic. So in any case, Taurus will not be operational in Ukraine anytime soon. Also, there is a chance that Taurus won't be delivered because of a US veto. ITAR restrictions applied to Taurus deliveries, unfortunately due to the integrated US origin turbofan engine and the GPS seeker. So unfortunately, yeah, the US might have something to say about the Taurus being delivered. Now, German aid to Ukraine, sticking on German topic here. It says more than 2 weeks ago, a larger column of at least 18 Cheetah Spags, self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, without insignia was spotted in Germany by one of my followers. In eastern Germany, it can be assumed that the train was travelling eastwards to Ukraine. Now, Gepards are these kind of rather older school anti-aircraft guns that have come back into fashion again due to the fact that they are slightly lower tech and allow you to take out Shahed drones much more cost effectively than throwing up a Patriot missile. The Cheetah version, Gepard means cheetah, that's the German word for cheetah, but when it's called cheetah in the English form, it is the Dutch upgraded version that gives it a slightly better radar and whatnot. Anyway, Gal says up to 60 Cheetah Spags, the Dutch version of the Gepard, were bought back from Jordan by the US, up to 45, and Germany 15. However, the last 18 Spags visible in the images exceed the remaining pledges made by Germany. So in my opinion, this should either be a mixed delivery, Germany and the US, or a pure US delivery. OPSEC disclaimer, I waited more than 2 full weeks before publishing the images to preserve OPSEC. So he's doing a good job there. More than enough time to allow that to settle. I also want to point out that Gepard Spags and Cheetah Spags are being used far away from the front line to defend cities, military installations and critical infrastructure throughout the whole country. I'm not going to share where in East Germany the images were taken. And then Null Reports, again on Germany, says German shells are to be produced in Ukraine. Today, Ukroboronprom, so again the state concern in Ukraine, signed a memorandum with defense giant Rheinmetall to explore the creation of a joint venture. The parties agreed to establish manufacturing facilities in Ukraine for artillery ammunition. The memorandum was signed in Madrid. So something to look out for going forward. But of course, these things take a long time to get going. In July 2022, says Gao, Germany pledged 6 HEP-70 mobile contamination vehicles, including decontamination material from Bundeswehr stocks, worth over 860,000 euros to Ukraine. And almost 3 years, I've now seen footage after that time from Ukraine for the first time. As always, I wanted to provide you with a full translation of the video. The decontamination systems are in service with the 704th CBRN, so these are guys that work against like nuclear and chemical warfare. Brigade of the Support Forces, which has shared the video 3 weeks ago. Thanks to Jeff2146 for making me aware of the video. So he's translated this video where it's talking through the use of this equipment. So if you want to go and check that out, go and check out German Aid to Ukraine, who's someone you have to be following on Blue Sky or Twitter if you really must. He's an absolute must there. Now, he then goes on to say it's worth noting that, so reaction to the EU being on track to send Ukraine more than 1.35 million artillery shells this year per Ukraine's foreign affairs ministry. Gal says it's worth noting that of these 1.35 million artillery shells the EU wants to supply to Ukraine, around 500,000 of them are financed by Germany alone, which corresponds to around 37% of the total deliveries. Germany already delivered 120,000 artillery shells in the first 4 months. I mean, Germany is... So someone else then says, a couple of weeks ago, a senior Czech minister said the target for 2025 was 1.8 million figures. The figures keep changing. Gao says that is something else. The Czech initiative depends on external funding, so theoretically it could not deliver 1 million artillery shells if the funding's not there. Moreover, countries outside the EU are just as capable and have done so of financing deliveries via the Czech initiative. For example, Canada and Norway finance deliveries, not EU countries. My tweet, however, is completely about EU countries. One shouldn't mix these things. And that's a confusion, is that quite often you hear the EU say, we're going to deliver this many shells to Ukraine, and then you've got the Czech initiative saying, hey, we're on course to do this. And those figures appear to be two different things, which is fantastic, because it means they're getting the EU shells and the Czech initiative shells, which amounts to potentially going forward into end of 2025 more shells for Ukraine than there might be shells for Russia. And that's why Petr Pavel from Czechia the president has stated that the fire ratio is now 1 to 2, 1 Ukrainian shell fired for every 2 Russians, which is down from 1 to 10. So it's a significant improvement. But that could be both from attrition of actual equipment that fires the stuff, but also because the Ukrainians are producing and procuring more than the Russians. The Russians relying very heavily on North Korea. Now, Chancellor Merz, just to top off the German stuff here, announced today that he intends to upgrade the German army to the strongest conventional army in Europe. Tendar says, I approve this message. That is really important. So Germany are back on the scene, and hopefully not as National Socialist as they were in the 1930s and 40s. Slight worry about AfD gaining in popularity there, though it must be said. Euromaidan Press says Ukraine finds over 20 components from the US and other countries in Russia's brand new cruise missile. This is the S8000. I've heard it called the S800, so I presume it's the 8000. A new Russian missile called the S8000, the banderole, contains 10 American microchips, revealing complex international technology networks, and that is being used in their most recent cruise missile efforts. A bit of a worry. And Emmanuel Macron has said France is ready to discuss the deployment of aircraft armed with nuclear bombs in other European countries. In other words, there's a step away from the US nuclear umbrella, and so therefore France and the UK would need to step up in order for Europe to have a robust nuclear deterrent that isn't the United States. Okay, now here we go, looking at the Orion here, which is, there's the S800 mentioned there. I knew I'd seen it somewhere. This is their equivalent of like the TB2, the Bayraktar drone, or the Reaper MQ-9 type drone. This is the Russian Orion drone, and it's carrying a compact cruise missile, the banderole mounted. So that is a worry, that you can put a cruise missile on a pretty regular, although your larger drone. Like this is, but it's not like, this is not some kind of new drone setup. This is like, let's get a Reaper, let's get a TB2 and whack a Storm Shadow on it and see if we can make that work. Well, it looks like the Russians with a compact cruise missile have possibly made that work. That's slightly worrying that. Now, the Russians are actively copying Ukrainian military experience. This is happening all over the place in the war in Ukraine from both sides. As soon as one side does something, so fiber optic drones, the Russians were all over that. The Ukrainians got onto it and do it themselves. Baba Yaga drones for the Ukrainians, you're going to be sure that the Russians are trying their hardest to make these larger, what they call kind of agri drones, agricultural type drones, to proliferate on the front as much as the Ukrainians. Here they are copying what we saw earlier, the kind of V5 type drones, V7, those Magura drones. Russian Navy has begun the formation of specialized naval regiments of drones, which will be part of all fleets. These units will be equipped with a variety of robotic equipment, air, ground, underwater, and surface drones. So that's all really good news. Well, really good news. Sorry, it's not good news. It's terrible news. It's really good news if you're the Russians, because there's been an asymmetry in a number of different places where the Russians are really struggling compared to the Ukrainians. But of course, if you are seeing something brand new that the other side is using to great effect, you know damn well that you're going to be trying your hardest to emulate that. You don't just sit back and go, they're clobbering us with this newfangled thing, which is actually relatively easy to copy and create. So let's just sit back and do nothing. No, each side is going to be copying the very best of the other side at all conceivable opportunities. So that's what you're getting there. Okay, that's enough from me. I am off to see a comedian tonight, Rob Lee, who I'm not Rob Lee. I'm thinking of Rob Newman, Stuart Lee, and he's one of my favourite comedians of all time. I just got his name wrong. I'm going to see Stuart Lee tonight, who is an aficionado of meta comedy. Absolutely love him. He's not everyone's cup of tea. But he certainly is mine. So I'm going with a mate to see Stuart Lee. So I'm not going to be producing content tonight, but I am going also to struggle perhaps tomorrow. My missus has a very big birthday tomorrow. She's a little bit older than me, and she's got a big one tomorrow, and we've got a bit of a shindig going on. So there's going to be a lot of organisation for that and whatnot. So I have to pump out content early doors tomorrow, and then be on best behaviour thereafter. So anyway, that's just a warning of content coming up. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, guys. Please like, subscribe, and share. And toodle pips. Happy Vishavanka Day.